The name of this special 45-minute program is The Hidden Revolution. It is brought to you by the company that works with you, that works for you, with new ideas for a new era, Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company of Columbus, Ohio.
This is Ed Murrow. Here are the voices of two Americans, each in his own way deeply concerned about a threat facing all of us.
I worry about the little children who are growing up. I haven't been afraid that there'd be a war until the last 2 weeks, and I am afraid.
I don't have a fear of a war. I feel that I am well protected in this country. And at least I don't think of war. I don't want to think of it. I lost a boy and I don't want to think of it.
These voices reflect an anxiety which would appear to have become a part of our daily life. For the atomic age, while bringing certain benefits to mankind, has also brought fear as a byproduct. In a world divided and condemned to a nearly permanent state of crisis, Americans have had to learn that the United States is vulnerable to attack, is indeed the target. While the extent of the actual danger may not always be apparent, each succeeding crisis carries the menace that it will this time lead to hostilities, as now in the case of Berlin, latest, though oldest point of friction in the continuing war of nerves between East and West. In the course of the next 45 minutes, we will examine some of the threats that face this country, what the implications of this period of revolutionary change may be for us, how we could be expected to react to an enemy attack on the day called X, and what image of this national danger a single community might reflect. Princeton, New Jersey, is in many respects typical of most American towns. Its population of nearly 20,000 is widely varied and is broadly representative of all shades of American opinion. The community's business center is a 3-block stretch of Nassau Street, bordering on the Princeton University campus. And every hour of the day, the university chimes remind the town people of the permanence of their peaceful routine. The community has 3 public schools, and any typical day at the elementary school might find the French class learning a song, or the physics class at the high school following a demonstration of a radiation detection meter.
And this gives a radiation count of something over 1,500 counts per minute.
Or the high school band in the midst of rehearsals. A routine day at the Princeton Hospital, as at any other hospital, means business as usual for the doctors.
Dr. Scassera.
While at the police station, the duty officer deals with the daily problems of protecting the community.
Well, what protection do you want?
That's all I do is take my money and fix up...
Princeton has a crack volunteer fire department, ready to respond instantly to any call.
Okay, let's go. Come on, let's get out of here.
This is Princeton, New Jersey, at peace on any ordinary day. But is this community, is the average American community, in fact, prepared to meet and protect itself in the event of the ultimate emergency, a military attack by an enemy? In a moment, we shall see if it is.
Tonight, Nationwide Insurance presents a discussion on an issue that concerns us all, world peace. Here's a problem that must be faced because with atomic weapons as standard equipment in today's arsenals, a hot war can be the beginning of the end for this world as we know it. It's up to individual citizens to persuade their representatives that only a peaceful solution to world problems is acceptable. Nationwide believes that people must keep working for peace, that we must learn the art of human relations even better than we now know the science of killing. And the outlook can be optimistic. Nationwide believes people are ingenious enough to solve any problem they face, provided that they work together to solve it. Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company of Columbus, Ohio, hopes that this program will inspire you to speak up loudly and clearly for peace, and to work even harder for it, so that someday this universal hope, shared by all, may become a universal fact. And now, here's Mr. Murrow.
What do Princetonians worry about? Here is a sampling of opinion taken on Nassau Street.
I have actually no worries that I can point out at this time.
What is my biggest worry? My husband drinks too much.
Trying to get a job at my age.
Being drafted into the service.
I worry about the little children growing up.
8 and 9-year-olds interrupt their game to tell one of our reporters what they understand the words air raid to mean.
When there's an air raid, we usually walk out on the car door, or sometimes we hide under our desk.
When everybody takes cover because of the enemy planes coming over, you should get in your basement and turn on the radio to counter it.
It's kind of scary in a way because you don't know where they're coming or not. Sometimes we hear a plane go by and we think that's that.
If it's an A-bomb, it would probably be disastrous for everybody.
What would happen if an A-bomb or H-bomb hit on the day called X? We asked Dr. Warner Schilling of Columbia University's Institute of War and Peace to give us his description of that day.
Let us assume arbitrarily that, moved by design, desperation, blunder, or accident, Russia attacks us out of the blue 2 years from now for the purpose of destroying as many of our cities and as much of our retaliatory force as they can. Assuming a mixed force on the order of 1,000 ICBMs, 150 bombers, and 100 missile-launching submarines, and making some crude guesses about the targets they would endeavor to hit, the accuracy and reliability of their delivery systems, and the efficacy of our own defenses, it is hard to see how the Russians could avoid getting at least 250 bombs on target. An attack of this magnitude would kill about 1/2 the population, injure an additional 6, and in short, only 1 out of 3 of us would survive uninjured. Those living in the center of our 50 to 60 largest cities or those near critical military installations would be killed instantly. New York would be leveled. New Orleans would become a radioactive lake, and so on. People living in brick houses 5 to 8 miles out from ground zero would find the brick house turned to rubble. Those living in frame houses 7 to 12 miles out from ground zero would find their house turned to splinters and planks. Those people standing outdoors would receive third-degree burns on bare skin 15 to 28 miles out from ground zero. At such distances, newspapers, awnings, and dust mops would burst into flame, and fire departments would find themselves overwhelmed by the raging fires caused by these and other sources. In the crucial hours of the attack, the Conrad system may well be jammed by enemy action. Many small towns, while far removed from major targets, and thereby escaping a direct hit, will nevertheless find themselves covered with lethal fallout. An enemy attack would presumably not occur without our having had some advance warning. A progressive deterioration of the political situation, alarming enemy moves, or suspicious blips on the screens of our early warning radar system. At present, our defenses are geared only to a manned bomber attack. We are not prepared for an enemy missile attack. Our military leaders and experts do not believe such an attack possible before another 2 or 3 years. So then, given the possibility of attack by manned bombers alone, how would we defend ourselves today? The first indication that an attack was on the way would be seen and heard at headquarters NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command at Colorado Springs. With this single gong, headquarters NORAD is put on warning that an unknown has entered our air defense system and that attention is being paid to it. A double gong indicates that the unknown is now identified as hostile, which triggers off a number of predetermined reactions. Here is General Earl Partridge, Commander-in-Chief, NORAD, to explain the steps he would now take.
When warning is received that an attack has been launched against North America, I, by telephone and teletype, warn all interested commands and agencies that an air defense emergency is declared.
At this point, with an enemy attack on the way, representatives of military and civilian agencies at NORAD would proceed according to a set plan. From his position in the Combat Operations Center, the civilian observer of the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization activates the CONELRAD network, and across the nation, radio stations either go off the air or switch to the CONELRAD frequencies to transmit civil defense information.
Attention all stations, attention all stations. This is a CONELRAD radio alert. Repeat.
Simultaneously, the Strategic Air Command's liaison officer informs SAC of the situation.
We have several unknown aircraft that have just penetrated the DEW line. NORAD has just declared an air defense emergency. Northern NORAD region has identified the unknown aircraft as hostile. Suggest you take appropriate action.
In addition, SAC and NORAD commanders can observe each other's plotting boards, by means of a system of closed-circuit television. At the news of an impending attack, the SAC Control Center in Omaha flashes the alert to its red, direct line telephone.
Attention all command posts. This is Iron Hand. This is a SAC alert. Repeat, a SAC alert. Authentication hijack. Hijack. All stations acknowledge at the count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All stations have acknowledged.
The teletype network then confirms the verbal order to all command posts. The commander of SAC, General Thomas Power, stresses the rapidity of the response that would follow any hint of an attack.
Within 15 minutes after receipt of warning, B-47s and B-52s of the SAC Alert Force would take off from bases in the United States, Europe, Africa, and Guam. Bomber crews would proceed to their pre-designated targets, provided the civil authorities have given SAC the final strike order.
By virtue of the immediacy of its mission, SAC depends above all on an efficient and effective system of communications. The main factor is speed, and with its single sideband system can reach stations as far apart as Guam, Thule, Greenland, Wheelus in North Africa, and South Ruislip, England, in less than a minute, and order them into action.
Cap gun golf, you loud and clear. Cap gun golf, Brownie, you're loud and clear. Cap gun golf, Brownie, you're loud and clear.
In the meantime, the director of the NORAD Combat Operations Center, Colonel Gould, orders maximum readiness.
St. NORAD declares maximum readiness, air defense emergency, and air defense warning red.
Warning red indicates the transition to war footing and the expectation of imminent hostility. Colonel Gould would now receive the report of the Senior Operations Duty Officer in the Combat Operations Center at NORAD on the worsening situation.
Colonel Gould, this is Major Larvey, the Senior Operations Duty Officer. The situation is becoming progressively worse. There are considerably more unknowns in the system, all high and fast. A Canadian interceptor pilot says they're hostile.
Major General Edward Underhill commands the Eastern Air Defense Force, one of the 3 air defense regions. As a field commander, he describes the action that would be taken should hostile aircraft enter his air defense system.
When an aircraft enters the system, we immediately try to identify each and every one of those by means of flight plan information which we receive from the CAA. We wouldn't fire against them unless they were doing something that would indicate they intended to commit a very definite hostile act against us.
With our air defense in readiness for a bomber attack, civil defense representatives call in the cities in their divisional geographic area to prepare them to receive instructions.
Cincinnati, test okay.
Charleston.
Charleston, okay.
Leo Hoegh is director of the Federal Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization. Should an enemy attack take place, he would give this advice to the public by radio.
Officials of the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization located at NORAD have just called me, informing me that the attack would take place within the next 2 hours. We who are responsible for leading and directing the federal government and the country during this emergency have moved to our relocation site, which is a protected site near Washington.
This is a simulated civil defense exercise.
If that calls for moving out, move out. If it calls for take cover, take cover. If you do not know your local civil defense plan, tune in your Conrad radio station on 640 or 1240 radio AM.
This system serves to alert many communities to the oncoming attack. The Princeton police keep a radio tuned to one of the Conrad frequencies 24 hours a day. The officer on duty would now turn on the alarm system, setting in motion the town's own civil defense plan. The police officer then notifies the local disaster control director, other responsible town officials, and all patrol cars.
Captain Sage, air raid signal, red.
Well, thank you. I'm proceeding down to control center. I'll report of my arrival.
KEB 267.
The hospital, alerted by the siren, summons its emergency staff to a soft chime, taking care not to spread panic among the patients.
Roll call. A building.
This is the French class at the elementary school.
Oui, tout à fait.
Boys and girls, this is an air raid drill. Will you please line up at the door, as we have done in the past? Alan, will you open the door, please?
A band rehearsal at the high school.
There's an alert! There's an alert!
By now, all civilian air traffic has been diverted or grounded, and navigational aids are shut off. The New York SAGE Air Defense Center, whose air defense responsibility includes Princeton, orders fighter interceptors scrambled.
Very good, an active air defense scramble, Yankee Hotel 16.
The fighters are guided to their target by information from the SAGE computer, which processes all area radar data and passes it on also to the local defense installations. With the approaching bombers soon to be within range, the Nike anti-aircraft missile installations prepare for action.
Okay, let's make a battle station.
Foxtail, this is Cyclops. Stand by for change of conditions. Air defense warning red. All units achieve battle stations. Stand by to roger over OC line.
Designator.
The alarm is passed on from the Nike master control to the missile site. The enemy will soon be within range.
All stations, this is the battery control officer, prepared for action. At battle station.
Battery at battle station.
All stations, this is the battery control officer, about to engage. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire.
A theoretical bomber attack and our present military reaction to it. But what of the people of Princeton? The people of any American community? Are they prepared? What would they do in case of attack?
Gee whiz. I don't know, Tata, too.
We hear the sirens, but where we would run or do or anything else, I wouldn't know.
I might panic. We could perhaps be in a tremendous radioactive area. Now, whether I should get my family in a car and start running west or east away from the explosion, I just don't know.
If I was home and the children were in school, I'd go to school after them. I know I shouldn't, but that would be my first impulse.
Just give me a blonde, a book, and a bottle of whiskey, and a table to hide under, and I'll stay put.
What's the first thing I would do in case of an air raid? Why, you're supposed to turn off your radio and turn out your lights and such things as that. And you go in the basement for safety. How long would I stay? Until everything is quiet.
If there is an attack or something, I think 50% of the people won't even know what to do. Frankly, I don't know what the signal is.
You have your shelters. There's shelters all through Princeton. There is that.
We haven't shelters. We haven't anything of that sort.
Would Princeton really be prepared? We asked the mayor, Raymond F. Mayle.
It's one thing to say we will notify all police, but I know a few weeks ago we had a tragic automobile accident which involved the death of one person. It involved one telephone pole that brought some hot, high-tension wires down on the street and severed only one of our major arteries coming into Princeton. Tied up our town facilities, as it were, for the better part of 2 or 3 hours throughout the night. And suppose it were even half of this small town that had been laid low by some, enemy attack. I just think that we would be totally and woefully unprepared to even think through where we would start with our bare hands and what equipment would be left.
Here is the administrator of the Princeton Hospital, John Kaufman.
I understand that there's certain equipment needed to decontaminate the patients that might have been exposed to an atomic blast, but we have no special equipment for that, and I am not sure that any hospital has received any specific instructions about what equipment they might have that would be useful in this particular type of problem.
The fire chief, Walter Cohn, admits that he has received no instructions on how to deal with an atomic disaster.
I only wish that the civil defense, together with our community, would get together with the fire department to try to do something about instructing us and giving us the material to fight this particular thing with.
It must be said, in fairness to the local civil defense director, Captain Jeffrey Sage, that he has only been in office for the past 4 months.
We are weak in many of the vital items
which would be required for immediate use. If we were suddenly attacked, it would be necessary to rely on our obtaining assistance through a county coordinator, regional coordinator, or from the state civil defense and disaster control.
Why hasn't more been done in the way of preparations? In Princeton, opinions vary.
I don't think anybody really fears it too much. I mean, they don't worry about anything like till it happens, and then there'll probably be a panic.
I used to be a policeman over in the university. I'm supposed to know, but I know nothing. I think we know some, but we don't understand it.
I think it's the feeling that atomic attack is, it's still in cloud nine, I suppose, in a sense.
In my home, my mother hardly even believes in any kind of civil defense. If we're going to be bombed, then we'll all be wiped out anyway, and why worry?
If I should happen to lose my family or myself because of my lack of knowledge, I wouldn't want to blame anyone. But I would just say that the means and methods of getting it to the public evidently have not been real good, because I don't know what I'm supposed to do about many of these matters.
I feel that I should know what I should be prepared for. I should have a place to go and take my family. I think it is important, the fresh water and food and the things that which the civil defense tells you to do. I think these should be followed. I am a guilty party.
Some blame the civil defense arrangements.
I belong to civil defense, and I don't think we got enough training. Well, if something should happen, we're not prepared for it.
Their warnings are so confusing. It's, I think, difficult for the man on the street to figure out just what is being attacked, if it is an alarm, or if it's a warning, or if it's an all clear.
Others feel that civil defense is useless.
Well, nobody is prepared for it. It is too horrible to think about it, and I don't think that anybody can imagine the disaster. It's no use being prepared for it. A real civil defense is impossible today. It's simply eyewash. We could just as well spend our money in much more fruitful and productive purposes.
John Kaufman, the hospital administrator, cites an example of confusion.
The telephone operators at the Princeton Hospital have experienced a call from the local police department notifying them that on one occasion alert orange juice or alert some other juice. And the operator has immediately informed me, and my response has been, well, what am I supposed to do, or did they say anything else? And no, that was it. Not too long ago, after Mr. Sage was appointed local CD disaster coordinator, I asked him what this meant, and after a great deal of research, I don't think he's to date really established what one or the other of these so-called juices or alerts mean. And I think that this is a perfect example of the Princeton Hospital being typical of most hospitals in the country, not knowing exactly what is expected of them in the case of a national disaster.
The local civil defense representative, who is known as Disaster Control Director, is Captain Jeffrey Sage.
One of the commissioners on the Atomic Energy Commission was giving us a talk once on types of shelter, and I said, well, doctor, you got a shelter in your basement? I said, no, I haven't. There's one of your top men in your Atomic Energy Commission watching, and he'd done nothing. So if you can't get the top people to do something, how do you expect the poor devil down here on the ground level to do it?
Captain Sage's view is that the confusion stems from a lack of clear and consistent directives from the top.
What was it, just last year they spoke about the 70 million people being killed? And then right on top of that, they put out they wanted $32 billion to build shelters. They didn't say where they were going to build them. They put out pamphlets for a family shelter, but who's got $5,000 or $6,000 to spend on it? They've never come out with a do-it-yourself or a $50 job with a reasonable approach to the individual as what he can do for himself and his family.
A summing up is offered by Don Stewart, editor of the Princeton Weekly, Town Topics.
It seems to me there's a fundamental lack of appreciation of the need for civil defense here in Princeton, about equally divided between the average citizen and the civil defense authority. I think a large part of this stems from Princeton's location in what was originally defined as the world's best bombing run. Princeton is exactly 50 miles between New York and Philadelphia, an error of 50 miles in launching a guided missile from somewhere in the USSR is obviously infinitesimal, and something aimed for Manhattan Island could very easily land in Princeton and completely erase the entire community. The question being, what is the need for building bombing shelters, for taking routine precautions when a hydrogen-guided missile can eradicate the entire community in one complete blow?
This is the disturbing picture we found in Princeton, New Jersey. A community pointed out to us by civil defense officials as being in many respects typical of small American towns. It may lead us to question if the sheer enormity of the nuclear threat has not in fact made it seem unreal. But even though the mind is unable to comprehend this possible reality, we may well ask, what can we do to avoid catastrophe? At a time when some people are led to wonder if they might not be wiped out at one blow. In a moment, we shall examine this crucial question.
In 1926, a group of Ohio families faced a problem: how to get lower auto insurance rates. The solution? They formed their own company. This insurance organization, Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company of Columbus, Ohio, has now grown to over 2 million members, and it still maintains its original cooperative spirit. As an example, last week policyholder delegates from 17 states met with top management in Columbus, Ohio. They made suggestions on how their companies could better serve them, how services might be improved and expanded. Nationwide officials listen closely because it's their job to see that the companies continue to meet people's changing needs. This is a nationwide experiment, and it's also a nationwide tradition. For years, Nationwide has encouraged policyholders to participate in company affairs. Out of this have come many new product and service ideas. For example, packaged homeowner plans, new drive-in claim service, merit-rated auto insurance now in some states are just a few of the hundreds of policyholder proposals that Nationwide has already adopted. This sort of customer participation in business helps Nationwide provide better, more up-to-date service for its policyholders. But this principle of participation isn't unique to Nationwide. It's simply the application of democratic principles to modern business. For when people get together democratically, they can solve almost any problem, even the problem of how to achieve world peace. It's for this reason that Nationwide has presented this series of radio programs. We hope they'll encourage you to meet with your neighbors and to work together for the solution of bigger problems, above all, the problem of world peace. If democracy is to survive, if we are to survive, all must learn to be participants, not mere spectators in history. This is the message Nationwide Insurance wishes to leave with you tonight.
If there should be a nuclear attack on this country, the impact would be twofold: destruction and dislocation of our institutions. Commissioner Willard Libby of the Atomic Energy Commission explains the probable extent of the devastation and advises individuals on what they should know in the event of such an attack.
We have two kinds of damage. One is from the actual blast. Everything in the line of sight and is combustible will be ignited. This first kind of damage, blast and burn, I consider to amount to several millions of casualties on the kind of attack that would be expected. Another kind of effect from atomic and hydrogen bombs, radioactive fallout, is to be measured in terms of millions, but one must examine this more closely because you don't die immediately from radiation. So these casualties due to radiation, radioactive fallout, are going to be delayed, and there will be opportunity to do some things to help them, even if they do receive the radiation. The important point is that none of these people need die if they know what to do. Now, the protection against radioactive fallout can be managed. Largely a matter of taking care that you have a shelter, that you have a radiation instrument, and that you have some food stored away, and that you have a means of communicating and learning what the general situation is.
Given these chances of survival, what are the other consequences of a nuclear attack? How many Americans are really aware of how profoundly their lives would be changed? Dr. Philip Jessup, co-director of the Council for Atomic Age Studies at Columbia University, analyzes these possible consequences.
We must assume that in a nuclear attack, many of the casualties will be government officials, even if we vastly increase our present inadequate preparations for civilian defense. The need for organization and control will be greater than ever before, and the need will not be easy to meet. Some planning is going on under the leadership of the Office of Civil Defense Mobilization now. Here at Columbia University, for instance, our Council for Atomic Age Studies have helped prepare survival statutes to take care of emergency plans for succession to important government offices. One may assume that top personnel are warned and escape to the secret shelters which have been prepared. After the attack, they establish contact as best they can with other officials, especially with commanders of troops, because that would be inevitably a time for martial law. The job of government would no longer be protection of individual liberties. It would be total mobilization for survival of the state.
Dr. Jessup does not feel that the outlook is hopeless.
We Americans, I think, have a better chance than many peoples for the survival of our system and our values, if we ourselves survive at all. The reason is that Americans are self-reliant. They are used to taking part in government. Given equal life and health survival, American democracy will spring back with much greater resiliency than any autocracy in which the people have not shared in government. Even so, at best, it would be a long road back to the America we know.
But above all, the basic means to survival is practical knowledge. The knowledge that each individual must have to protect himself and his family. Dean Polentz of the Office of Civil Defense and Mobilization, the man directly responsible for the formulation of the National Plan, a document designed to prepare the nation to survive an attack, has these basic suggestions.
Essential items which should be stocked include an emergency store of food, water, fuel, first aid supplies, and other personal materials necessary to sustain life for at least 2 weeks, including a battery-operated radio to receive survival directions. Medical care is expected to begin with the individual. At least one member of each family group should be trained in first aid and home nursing. Persons in areas under heavy nuclear attack cannot count on receiving immediate organized assistance. Individuals and their families must be self-reliant in the event of fire, improvising to help control fire hazards. They're responsible for learning techniques necessary to avoid the injurious effects of radiological, biological, and chemical warfare.
We have been dealing so far with the direct threat to the nation of a nuclear attack, but this attack may never take place. For in the struggle in which we are engaged, war, be it global or local, is only one of the challenges which we must face. Dr. Henry Kissinger, Assistant Director of the Harvard University Center for International Affairs.
I think that if we make the proper effort, the day called X will never happen. But it doesn't exhaust our dangers. We have, for example, the problem of piecemeal attacks, such as the situation we now face in Berlin, the Korean War, or the Quemoy and Matsu situation. In addition to this, we have the growing Soviet economic potential and the economic penetration of the newly independent states. We have the growth of populations all over the world, which raises economic problems, social problems, and political problems. We have the emergence of so many newly independent states, each of them trying to be autonomous at the same time, that this is economically less and less feasible. And perhaps most worrisome of all, there may be the tendency that the newly emerging states and more of the world will become spiritually alienated from us, that we may find ourselves in a world which, if it isn't hostile to us, will consider us as irrelevant. Now, as a nation of specialists, we have a tendency to assume that our problems are a series of individual cases. But the deepest challenge may be that we have to be able to do well in all the categories that I mentioned, that if we can't do well in all of them, we will not succeed in any of them.
Senator Hubert Humphrey is one of those who believes that our deterrent force may prevent a nuclear attack on this country, but he is not satisfied with our policy of dealing with piecemeal attacks.
We've developed a great deterrent capacity in our long-range bombers, in our projected missiles, in our overseas bases, and, of course, in our large weapons. I doubt very much that the Soviet Union will premeditate an all-out nuclear attack, knowing the price of retaliation. It may not want to blow the world to pieces. It'd kind of like to pick it up, however, piece by piece. I like to call this Operation Nibble, just taking a little bit here and a little bit there. And it is in this area where we are least prepared and where we seem to be doing the least amount of planning. It seems to me that what we need to do is to have the kind of a foreign policy where we don't have to treat with one subject at a time, but where we're prepared to move on all fronts at once. And currently, I would suggest that what we need is to have a greater balance of forces so that there is maneuverability and flexibility in that military structure. And at the same time, to prepare ourselves for what Khrushchev has said is the war of trade, the war of commerce, the war of industry, the war of economics, the war of capital. Now, this is a war we ought to win hands down.
A complicating factor in this total competition with the communist world is the sizable group of emerging nations. Professor Robert Bowie, director of Harvard Center for International Affairs.
We've got something like 22 nations which have come into existence since the end of the war. And these include about 700 million people, which is nearly a third of the world's population. They're living on less than $100 a year. They have 75 or 80% illiteracy. Their population is growing at a fantastic rate, and they are all badly in need of capital, talent, leadership, and many other things which go to make a viable society. On the other hand, the Soviet Union and Communist China are engaged in an enormous effort for economic growth and have developed dynamic societies which do succeed in achieving that kind of growth. The Soviet Union and China are dedicated to using their resources and power to spread communism. And finally, there are the developed countries of the world, including Western Europe and Japan, which are relatively weak. It seems to me obvious, then, that we could lose our ability to conduct the way of life that we want if the Soviets should succeed by non-military means in acquiring domination of these uncommitted areas and the rest of the world.
Dr. Kissinger argues that the world changes already set in motion could have serious consequences for us.
The grave danger is that we will seem irrelevant to the rest of the world, and that part of it will treat us as if our concerns had no application to theirs, and the other part will indeed treat us as hostile. The reason for that is that we are living through a tremendous revolution in social institutions, political expectations, economic forms, and people are looking for a new orientation. They are therefore looking for an expression of purpose and concern. And what they have been missing in America is precisely this. Now, the United States has always had an image of itself as representing universal values. To live in a world in which we are forced back entirely on ourselves is going to be a tremendous psychological shock to us and maybe beyond our capacity.
What can we do to prevent our drifting into a world alien or hostile to us? Professor Bowie.
We've got to make available capital, we've got to make available other forms of assistance, and then we've also got to maintain the conditions under which mutually beneficial trade can exist between the developed countries and the underdeveloped countries and ourselves. That's where it seems to me the question arises as to whether the people of the United States and the government of the United States are really going to be willing to make the sacrifices which this entails.
The burden of these sacrifices would fall heavily on the youth of the nation. How do the young react to the challenges of this revolutionary age? In just a moment, we'll hear the views of the young people of Princeton.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's broadcast is the last in a series of 6 programs called The Hidden Revolution, brought to you by Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company of Columbus, Ohio. We hope you've enjoyed these programs, and we trust that you will write and let us know just how you feel about them. Nationwide's purpose in sponsoring this radio series has been to point out the crucial problems that have arisen from modern scientific and technological advances. Whether we will be the beneficiaries or the victims of this hidden revolution remains for the people to decide. For Nationwide believes that our actions will determine the future course of events. Perhaps this sounds like an unusual activity for an insurance company. That's because Nationwide is an unusual company, committed to the belief that people working together can determine their own destinies. For once the problems are known, the ideas to solve them are sure to follow. And now, back to Edward R. Murrow.
The young people of today can look forward to a challenging future, but they may also have to face the prospect of great sacrifices, perhaps inevitable in a world divided and in dread of the day called X. Here is how several Princeton High School students view their future.
We just got finished studying atoms and atomic energy, and the teacher was telling us, some of the effects of what would happen. It really sounds horrible.
If I was told that this town, Princeton, was going to be bombed in another 15 minutes, I'd just think my last thoughts and organize myself for death.
The kids my age in this country and over in Russia, we're going to be the ones that'll be fighting everybody now. They'll probably set off the fuse and we'll have to fight it.
I don't really think that any of my acquaintances believe very sincerely in the possibility of a third world war. It's just impossible that Princeton should be bombed.
If an attack came, it'd be every man for himself.
I think one of the greatest dangers to our democracy is exemplified by us sitting here claiming that there will not be a third world war. And it's simply that we, who are so very secure and happy in Princeton, New Jersey, resent having to face facts like the possibility of a third world war. And that we also, in domestic affairs, resent having to think about things like slums and inefficiency in the government and laws which are passed with which we disagree. We just would rather sit back and be happy where we are. And this is very dangerous, it seems to me, to a democracy.
Dr. Philip Jessup, long a student of the body politic, is concerned about the direction we seem to be taking. He feels that we must face certain basic questions now, before it is too late.
I think there's no question that the American people now are entirely too complacent about this whole situation. No one is ready to give up his own particular claims or interests. You see it even in the reluctance to subject themselves to any higher taxation or to deprive themselves of any of the soft luxuries to which we are accustomed. And we aren't getting any impulse from leadership in the direction of facing the situation which actually confronts us. There hasn't been even a whisper from any national leader who is in office of the blood, sweat, and tears philosophy with which Churchill inspired the British people during the war. And it seems to me it's a great mistake to assume that all of this adjustment to the difficulties of the situation can wait until war is actually upon us, at a time when people do respond. This is a time, it seems to me, when leadership has got to provide that kind of a drive which will stimulate people to accept sacrifices at this moment, so that the effort will be made to avoid this very thing that we have been talking about.
This is Ed Murrow. Good night.
You have been listening to The Day Called X, the sixth in the Hidden Revolution series, narrated by Edward R. Murrow. Produced and written by George A. Vikos. Associate producer, Bill Guide. Field reporters, Joel Heller and Robert Young. This has been a Unit 1 presentation of CBS News. The Hidden Revolution is brought to you by the company that works with you, that works for you with new ideas for a new era. Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company of Columbus, Ohio, and its nearly 5,000 local representatives. For your free copy of our discussion guide to these series, simply write to Nationwide Insurance, Columbus 16, Ohio. That's Nationwide Insurance, Columbus 16, Ohio.
This is the CBS Radio Network.